ladies and gentlemen, America's great chameleon, our relational maestro, our funky humanitarian, the greatest Herbie Hancock.
Thank you. Wow, that's beautiful. Very nice. I have to live up to that, right? Thank you, Vijay. Thank you so much. And I extend my gratitude to all of you joining me this afternoon for my 5th lecture in the Ethics of Jazz series. Over the past several weeks, we've discussed the wisdom of one of my musical mentors, Miles Davis, the possibilities and positives of breaking the rules, and the power of cultural diplomacy. Last week, you had a peek into my personal tech laboratory and learned about some things that are on the horizon. And I'm really looking forward to this week's lecture, Buddhism and Creativity, because both of these subjects have been and continue to be driving forces and are interwoven throughout my life. Buddhism doesn't write the notes for me, but it absolutely and positively affects how I look at everything. Buddhism is uncovering and leading a creative life, and in the process, establishing your own story. A common viewpoint holds that one's destiny is predetermined by external forces. However, the practice of Buddhism can break through that notion and carve out the kind of life where you're the author of your book and not the co-author or a character in someone else's story. You may wonder, how can this be accomplished? But first, let me tell you how I came to find Buddhism. It was 1972, and my entire focus was devoted to music. And I longed to develop and improve the percentages of times I felt my playing was on point and things were flowing. The so-called, good nights. And the main reason that I entertained that idea was due to an experience I had in Seattle with a maestro of the bass, Buster Williams, who was a member of Mwandishi, my avant-garde space band that depended so much on the intuition and empathy of the musicians, where a lot was left up to the moment and what I believed at the time, chance. Well, one Thursday evening, after our gig, a fan invited us to several parties. And since we were all young guys and wanted to have fun, we all went out and painted the town red and every other color in the crayon box. We eventually hauled ourselves slowly back to the hotel and had at the most 2 hours of sleep. At the club, no one felt like playing. But it was a Friday night, and the place was jam-packed. So we dragged ourselves onto the stage, and although we had some energy, it wasn't nearly enough. My initial thought was that I was going to pass the buck since I didn't have it in me to set the pace. So I called an uncharacteristic first tune called Toys. That begins with a solo bass intro. Now, the acoustic bass is the softest instrument in the band. And it was an odd choice to open up the night with this tune, Toys. Buster started improvising, and I couldn't believe my ears. Previously unheard of sounds were coming out of his instrument. He also employed some new techniques that looked physically impossible. Check this out. His hand was moving up the bass. 2 fingers were trilling 2 different strings. His pinky was sliding up the 3rd string. And his, sliding up the third string, right? And the thumb was sliding down the 4th string, right? The bass neck was on his shoulder. All 5 fingers were on the fingerboard, right? And he's got this trilling going on. Anyway, after hearing and seeing him perform this feat once, I was amazed. And then he looked up the neck of the bass, and he did it again. The audience went crazy, and all eyes and ears were concentrated on his every fantastic move. Then I felt myself waking up. The band finally came in to play the melody, and I could tell by the way the band hit that they woke up too. We wound up playing this magical, spiritual set that felt like an adventure, a journey going in several directions. At the end of the show, people rushed up to the stage, many of them in tears. And for the first time, I heard the crowd say that they hadn't merely heard the music, they experienced it. After the show, I took Buster back to the dressing room and asked him about this new philosophy or something that I heard he was exploring. And if you could make him play the bass like that, I wanted to know what it was. Actually, his eyes lit up, and he told me he'd been chanting for a way to tell me about it. And at that moment, it occurred to me that the only real way he could have reached me was through the music. If whatever he was chanting produced that bridge to reach me, I was even more open to hearing what he had to say. He explained that he'd been practicing Buddhism and that he'd been chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. What's Buddhism about? What's this practice of Buddhism? Many questions were forming in the back of my mind. And my questions were answered with straightforward, practical answers that made straightforward, logical sense. And curiously, each time I'd ask a question, his answer would satisfy 4 or 5 others I was waiting to ask. My interest was piqued because aside from the Buddhist clarity, there was optimism, trust, and an innate respect for all human beings. The more I listened, the more I hoped this was what I was looking for and that it would work for me. Buster had only been practicing about 3 weeks at the time. It's remarkable. Our short discussion was exciting and exhilarating. I wanted to know about the meaning of Buddha, and I learned that it's a condition of being awakened and aware that everyone possesses it already. I learned that Buddhists believe life is eternal, meaning it has no beginning and no end. Now, ever since I was 10 or 11 years old, I believed that life had no ending, but it never occurred to me that life had no beginning. So what's Nam Myoho Renge Kyo? Well, Buster said it's the law of the universe, the rhythm of life. And that by saying these words over and over again, we align ourselves with this rhythm. Buster also said that because it's a law, like gravity or electromagnetic force, chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo works whether you believe it or not. He encouraged me to try it out and see for myself, which I did. Naturally, the word rhythm appealed to me. The power of sound, which I know music exemplifies, is kind of what chanting is about. Buster said that Buddhism involves not only the spiritual world, but the physical world as well. Both are like two sides of the same coin. And that chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, done with the voice, is internal and external because it's sound. As a matter of fact, basically, Kyo means sound. Could this be the answer I was looking for to help me enhance my musical performance? Over the past 42 years, I've studied, practiced, and learned more, but these were the initial inklings that stimulated my curiosity. Practicing Nichiren Buddhism reveals a major shift in one's perception of the relationship between you and the external environment you experience. Through faith, practice, and study, you can illuminate this connection and uncover an entirely new perspective that gives you true freedom to be the captain of your ship and command and control the adventure of your life. The conventional perspective makes us a slave to the environment, but the truth is quite the opposite. The environment doesn't necessarily have to change, but we do. As a matter of fact, seeing the environment as a cause is a delusion. The reality is that cause is within your own life, and you have the innate power to transform yourself and advance, expand, and develop a happy life for yourself and for others through this practice. A new clarity opens up great inspiration for creativity. Creativity. The typical meaning, which we all know and believe, says that creativity is the use of the imagination and original ideas in the production of an artistic work. And we can end the quote there, right? So, in this lecture, we're now working with a definition of creativity that expands beyond the typical meaning. For example, creativity isn't limited to my music. It encompasses what I say, how I act, my perceptions, and is the process involved in living an inventive, inspired, and meaningful life, which we all aspire to. But all of us have the capacity to be creative, artistic individuals. And although some of you may shake your head and think, no way, not me. Expanding your personal viewpoint will affect your daily life and influence your purpose. This is an artistic endeavor in which we are all involved. It's called the art of living. I've found that practicing Buddhism has broadened my perspective, and thus my ability to lead a more original and resourceful life is always unfolding. Practice creates an inner transformation of our character that helps highlight our humanity and modify the state of our being. We call this human revolution. Since I'll be talking about how Buddhism can serve creativity, I want to first examine a few of the basics as expounded by Nichiren Daishonin, a 13th century Buddhist monk. He was founder of the Buddhism upon which the SGI, Soka Gakkai International, the lay Buddhist organization I belong to, bases its activities for peace and happiness in the world. Nichiren Buddhism is the fundamental platform on which I stand. The foundation is the belief that Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is the law of the life of the universe, the one constant that connects everything. Chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo harmonizes our lives with the rhythm of the universe. This law was revealed by Nichiren Daishonin in the 13th century, and its recitation is the practice for attaining enlightenment. He also established the practice of reciting excerpts from the Lotus Sutra in a daily ceremony we perform in our homes called Gongyo. So let's break down the words in that law. Okay? Nam comes from a Sanskrit word, namus. It's a devotion or fusion of your life with the law. Myoho means mystic law. Mystic because it includes the things we don't yet understand as well as the things that we do understand. Renge is lotus, representing simultaneous cause and effect. Why? Well, the lotus flower, which is really beautiful, and it grows in a swamp, but its seeds, the cause, are right on top of the flower, the effect. This is why it represents simultaneous cause and effect. Life is not easy, especially today. And I'm sure we can all agree we live in the muck and mire of a difficult world. At the same time, there's an undeniable beauty to the essence of life. And we all have an infinite capacity to create a beautiful life and manifest the light of advancement by turning poison into medicine. But what does simultaneous cause and effect mean? It means that the effect is inherent in the cause, but it may take some time to manifest. Kyo literally means sutra or teaching. But on a deeper level, it's the true teaching expressed through the sound of one's voice or the sounds and vibrations of the universe. It encompasses one's awakening to a true understanding of the law. And this is wisdom. You know, we hear a lot about information and knowledge these days. When's the last time you heard the word wisdom? There's a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom. A person with a lot of knowledge can be smart, but a smart person isn't necessarily wise. My phone is smart, but I wouldn't want it to make serious decisions for me. My life mentor, SGI's President Ikeda, says, wisdom is stimulated by compassion. He says, quote, "Let us give something to each person we meet: joy, courage, hope, assurance, or philosophy, wisdom, a vision for the future. Let's always give something." End quote. This is his wisdom stimulated by his compassion. President Ikeda also said, quote, "We are not born into this world to suffer and be miserable. We are born to be happy and savor true joy, never allowing any suffering or misfortune to defeat us. This is the essential message of the Lotus Sutra." End quote. The Lotus Sutra is one of the most compassionate and significant scriptures of Nichiren Buddhism that says, absolute happiness is inherent in all life. All of us possess the Buddha nature, and the attainment of enlightenment is open to all people as they are. To me, the purpose of my faith is to nurture feelings of empowerment and vitality, encourage a sense of personal infinite power, value, and limitless potential, and in the process reveal that every one of us has this ability. There's no ego involved, no comparisons to others, and if you're moving forward and growing, you naturally want to help others realize their dreams and happiness. We find those qualities in the jazz experience too. Every human being experiences suffering, and one of life's pivotal challenges is how to turn a negative experience into something of value. When you've fallen to the ground, use the ground to get back up again. Here's a personal example. Michael Brecker was a remarkably talented and respected saxophonist. Perhaps you heard him play in jazz groups or on recordings or performances with Joni Mitchell, Frank Sinatra, Paul Simon, and a host of others, or caught him playing with the Saturday Night Live band. At one time, he was a member of my band, and we became very close. In 2004, he was diagnosed with the blood disorder myelodysplastic syndrome. And despite a widely publicized worldwide search, he was unable to find a matching stem cell donor, and a subsequent experimental partial transplant failed to save his life. Before he was diagnosed, and while we were on tour in 2005, I invited Michael to chant with me. And although he declined, he said he tried one time before the end of the tour. Then he discovered this blood disorder, and after receiving the diagnosis, gradually his faith in life diminished, leaving him with a feeling of despair. One afternoon, toward the end of the tour, Michael did Gongyo and chanted with me, and he enjoyed it. And soon, he became a member of SGI. At home, he would often chant with his son, Sam. And while his health was deteriorated, the strength and joy of his music intensified. Go figure. He was an inspiration to me, his family, and worldwide fans. A few months later, he put together a group of top jazz musicians that I was privileged to join. It included Pat Metheny on guitar, Jack DeJohnette on drums, John Patitucci on bass, and Brad Meldau also on piano. During a break in the recording session, he and I met in the lounge, and Mike thanked me and told me that through practicing Buddhism, his faith had been restored, and he found a new purpose in life that went way beyond his music. He and his wife organized a series of bone marrow drives throughout the world, encouraging the people to get tested and join the International Bone Marrow Registry. By making his illness known, he raised an enormous amount of money for testing, and although unable to find a match for himself, he signed up thousands of donors, many of whom were a match for others with this dreaded disease. Numerous lives were saved because of Michael's actions through his profound revelation. Michael's actions epitomize the meaning of Buddhism by displaying the value of his humanity, not just the value of his magnificent musical ability. He transformed society through transforming himself. Transformational wisdom, human revolution. At his memorial service, we set up a temporary Buddhist altar, and Wayne Shorter, Buster Williams, and I, led by Mike's son, Sam, chanted along with the audience for about 5 minutes. And this felt complete because, as I mentioned, it was Buster Williams who introduced me to Buddhism decades earlier, which introduced me to my true life mentor, Daisaku Ikeda. The importance of having a mentor can't be overstated. And this mentor-disciple relationship of sharing and learning in Buddhism is essential. It's also important in jazz, which I'll explain later. Okay, what are the attributes of a true mentor? A person of honorable behavior, a teacher whose hopes and dreams you aspire to. A person of courage and respect who is an excellent example of the qualities you want to emulate through your own individuality. And I quote the SGI study guide. We need to learn from the teachings and example of an excellent teacher or mentor who is thoroughly dedicated to correct Buddhist practice. What qualifies a mentor in Nichiren Buddhism is lifelong commitment to the happiness of all people through the spread of the mystic law, and dauntless action to fulfill that commitment in the face of all obstacles and opposition. This relationship is based on sharing the same vow as the mentor to relieve the suffering of all people and continuously taking action toward that end. In striving to develop and act upon that vow, we break through the constraints of our weaker, lesser selves and develop our greater selves, our true selves that regard the happiness of others as our own. End quote. Even within the various spheres of life, the mentor-apprentice model applies. Certainly within the jazz experience, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, don't we? Yeah. Over the past several weeks, I've told you about Miles Davis, Donald Byrd, and Chris Anderson, 3 of my musical mentors, who graciously passed along their knowledge and wisdom, which, through Buddhism, overflowed into other areas of my life. They, along with President Ikeda's writings and encouragement, were critical to helping me evolve, flourish, and delve deeper into my creativity. So, what is creativity? Well, coming up with a definitive meaning of creativity isn't only complicated, it's very difficult. And the action of carrying out creativity can be just as challenging. Often, creativity is a word associated with individuals from the cultural world of the arts, as though these mere mortals are the chosen ones. But with these constraints in mind, and recognizing that creativity transcends this concept, I'd like to submit to you this afternoon a few of my ideas about characteristics of cultural artistic creativity. The list could be endless because creativity is in the eye of the beholder. First up is inspiration, which is a good synonym for creativity. It's that eureka moment that gets the gears in motion. Next, hard work. People often say to me, "You've been playing for decades. It must be easy for you." Quite the contrary. My philosophy is, if it's easy, then I'm not working hard enough. Challenge is a constant in my life, and if the challenge isn't readily apparent, I create one. Perhaps by finding a pathway I haven't explored, which ignites my curiosity and paves the way to a new solution. Another characteristic is the never give up spirit, which goes hand in hand with courage. It means having the true grit to keep moving forward, searching for and finding the answers, saying, I can do this, actually encourages ideas. How about originality and innovation? Alan Alda, the actor and fan of cosmology, who played an important role in the creation of the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science, said, quote, originality is unexplored territory. You get there by carrying a canoe. You can't take a taxi. The late Theodore Levitt, a former professor at the Harvard Business School, credited with coining the term globalization, said, creativity is thinking up new things. Innovation is doing new things. Up next is ability or skill. Keeping my eyes and ears open, I learn from my experiences and from others and hone my skills. Okay, how about motivation? What actually motivates creativity? Well, anything under the sun, sometimes over the moon, can be a motivator, but here are a few examples. I know several people who feel they can't create without fear. It's not part of my process, but I understand the reason. As long as you aren't blocked by fear and have the conviction you can overcome it every time, then it ceases to be an adversary and you've actually turned poison into medicine. Pain and suffering can produce the most magnificent works of art. Tortured but brilliant prose and poetry and gut-wrenching music. Obviously, when creativity emerges, it can transform into liberation. Joy can stem from love and appreciation. A person, a beautiful painting, or perhaps a concerto of sounds from nature. Louis Kahn, called a philosopher among architects by Isamu Noguchi, said the following about joy and creativity. I felt, first of all, joyous. I felt that which joy is made of, and I realized that joy itself must have been the impelling force, that which was there before we were there, and that somehow joy was in every ingredient of our making. When the world was an ooze without any shape or direction, there must have been this force of joy that prevailed everywhere and that was reaching out to express. And somehow the word joy became the most unmeasurable word. It was the essence of creativity, the force of creativity, end quote. Now, here's a motivator I'm quite familiar with. The time clock. Very often, my motivation stems from the fact that time has just about run out. And I have to put something, anything on the page. Johann Sebastian Bach, devout Lutheran, when employed by the church, was required to write a new cantata every week. Luckily for us, this challenge gave the world some of his finest compositions. Here's a motivator that needs a transformation into something not so damaging to the body or psyche: stress. Although a potent motivator, it can often do more harm than good. When justice isn't implemented, anger is a powerful motivator calling attention to social, global, or civil rights issues. Jazz bassist Charles Mingus composed and recorded Fables of Faubus, a song written in opposition and protest against Arkansas Governor Orville E. Faubus, who in 1957 sent the National Guard to prevent 9 black teenagers from entering and integrating Little Rock Central High School. Another motivator is desire. I know. It conjures up so many formidable ideas and enticing images. Well, whether it's the desire to learn, help others, communicate feelings or theories, desire is undoubtedly a concept that makes things happen. Inventors, physicists, and scientists have cured diseases, traveled to other worlds, and given us technology because of desire for the greater good. In 2009, I had a strong desire to communicate the value of what can be created when people of various cultures work in tandem to express hope for the future. I call this the Imagine Project, and it fulfilled every reason for undertaking and implementing a concept that would illuminate the collage created by collaboration among people from different cultures. It was important for me to make this a truly global project, and as a result, the recording is in 7 different languages. So I'd also like to include multidimensionalism. Maybe that's related to multiplicity that Vijay was talking about. That's another feature of creative thinking. One of the songs on the Imagine Project, a duet called The Song Goes On, is a German poem written by Rainer Maria Rilke, put to music by Larry Klein, and sung by Shaka Khan in English and in Hindi by K.S. Chitra from India, home to several hundred different languages. I'd say this satisfies and defines a multidimensional approach to music creation. Now, who doesn't like to laugh? Humor is often an impetus for motivation. Observation can propel motivation. Several decades ago, Miles Davis and Wayne Shorter were walking down the road and they noticed someone at the corner getting ready to cross the street, when all of a sudden the person stumbled. Miles looked at Wayne and said, "Play that." And when hearing a Wayne Shorter quartet performance, one can conjure up a scene with 4 or 5 different scenarios happening at the same time. The conversations purposely don't mesh, but the piece works. So, imagine walking down the street, and on one side, there are 2 people strolling and chatting. A few yards behind finds a woman with packages and car keys in her hand, getting ready to open the door and drive off to points unknown. Way down the block is a boy and his dog playing, and his mother is coddling a crying baby. It's the reality of life. Different things go on simultaneously. And although not necessarily connected, these episodes forge a colorful story. That's a Wayne Shorter quartet performance. Naturally, creativity happens every day when we converse with others, share our thoughts, cooperate in a give and take, and enjoy the moment. These are the creative characteristics that also apply to jazz. And last but not least is imagination, which is, of course, a characteristic of creativity. Albert Einstein said, quote, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand," end quote. He also said something that doesn't surprise me. Quote, "If I were not a physicist, I'd probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music," end quote. So, we can probably all agree that the difficulty in coming up with a solid definition of creativity transcends the brain or verbal descriptions. That's why doing interviews or making speeches or giving a lecture is a challenge, because it requires words to describe an internal process that goes beyond what the brain can easily translate. And it's just that process that gives the art of creativity its magic. It's a zone within the greater self and a valuable place to inhabit. So, starting from the premise that the verbal description of the process isn't part of the process, my process often entails working on something for months and often knowing either something is missing or something is amiss. For example, I had been working on a piece for a TV commercial and had most of it worked out, but I was tearing my hair out trying to find the ending. Finally, something told me to stop and listen to what I was already doing. I had my eureka moment. What I'd been playing worked as is, and it didn't need an ending in the conventional way. The piece was more like a spiral or a circle, and I later recorded the song on my own album. It's called Maiden Voyage. I'll show you what I mean. You notice I didn't go. I didn't do that. I actually took the beginning and played it at the end. I just didn't recognize it at first. Miles Davis said, "Don't ever finish nothing." This makes room for the listener to come to his or her own conclusion, leaves the music open to a plethora of interpretations, and inspires the creativity of the audience. It's a different type of interaction. The musicians set up a springboard for creativity and leaves room for various interpretations. It's only when we push ourselves beyond our limits that our success becomes meaningful to ourselves and respected by others, said Daisaku Ikeda, president of SGI. Here's a personal example. Last year, I was invited to be the featured performer with the New York Philharmonic in a celebration of Chinese New Year. I was asked to play what's by far the most difficult and challenging piece I've ever tackled, called Erewhon. This piece was hard. The music not only looked complicated, for example, some of it was written in 4 staves. Normally that means 4 hands. And 3/4 of the way into the piece, it becomes impossibly fast and complicated with challenging leaps and demanding jumps. Never having reached this level of classical expertise, I kept putting off making a decision to participate until pressed by the previously mentioned time clock. And I finally agreed to play the piece. Because I believe if something unusual comes into my life, that it's there for a reason and shouldn't be ignored. And I thought about how proud my late mother would be, because this was the top, the pinnacle for her aspirations for me. And it was a huge hurdle for me because the piece was technically way beyond anything I'd done before. I worked tirelessly on it, and although not quite reaching the written tempo, I was so close. And a week before the performance, I was 93% there. Then I started fumbling, floundering, and actually started getting worse. 2 days before I was scheduled to depart for New York, I began to seriously panic. What had I gotten myself into? Using the strategy of the Lotus Sutra, going back to my Buddhist practice, I decided to attend an SGI meeting and knew that instead of only concentrating on my problem of mastering this piece, I might be able to help someone else at the meeting. During the drive to the meeting on this rainy, windswept, cold, dark night, I suddenly remembered that the Chinese conductor said the composer would welcome any improvisation I'd like to include. Since that's what I do, a feeling of such intense relief spread from the top of my head to the tips of my toes, and I actually began to cry. I understood that I'd already made the cause and got the internal effect with the realization of the solution, even before I got to the meeting. After the meeting, I headed home, sat down at the piano, started to play the difficult part, and the panic had already disappeared. On the night of the concert, I'd been chanting that my performance would touch the hearts of the people in the audience. About 20 minutes before the concert started, it occurred to me that this concert wasn't about me. It was a celebration of Chinese New Year, and that I wasn't the only scheduled performer. So I decided to change my prayer to desiring that all the performers would harmonize our two cultures, touch the hearts of the people, and have a great show. Deciding to go out to the stage and have fun, I started smiling, felt a radiance, was relaxed. You know what? I didn't have to improvise the demanding section. I nailed it. And although I didn't ask the conductor to go a little slower, that's exactly what he did. It must have worked, because afterwards I met people who were invited backstage, and they all really raved about my performance, saying it was beautiful and they were really moved by it. Many orchestra members also graciously complimented me on the performance. I would try to play that piece for you now, but you gotta. I didn't bring the music. You know. Now that one, no, you have to practice that for a while before you tackle it. Sometimes a creative solution can emerge from rethinking an existing pathway or exploring an overlooked idea that was a result of the narrow perspective of conventional thinking. Conventional thinking in jazz dictates compositions are built around melodies for horn, bass, or piano. But when we recorded the second Headhunters album, Thrust, I made the drums the focal point on a tune called Actual Proof. I wanted to make the arrangement into an atmosphere that featured the drums. But how would I accomplish this? Tap dancing. No, not me tap dancing. Let me explain. In the 1920s and early 30s, when tap dancing was in its heyday, a technique called stop time was used. It's a staccato version of a melody. This that I'm going to show you is multi-talented Sammy Davis Jr. tap dancing to a stop time version of the song Me and My Shadow. Me and my shadow strolling down the avenue. Anyway, you don't want to hear me sing it anyway. So I decided to take a melody and create something based on that stop time concept. But rather than do the obvious, I set out to explore unconventional devices that would be stimulating to the drummer. Taking it one step further, I chose a ballad, a challenge because it's not easily translated into stop time. I decided to work with the title theme from The Spook Who Sat by the Door, a film score I had written a year earlier in 1973. I constructed a piece which in its original form had an exotic, slow beat. Basically, it was that. But it had strings and flutes and so forth. But in the new version, I sped it up. I employed different techniques like shifting the natural sound of a phrase a little bit forward or a little bit backward, making it more provocative and interesting for the drummer. Now, here's a sample of the reworked version called Actual Proof from Thrust, with Paul Jackson on electric bass, Mike Clark on drums, Bill Summers on percussion, Benny Maupin on saxophone. The Spook Who Sat by the Door was the second film I scored. And the first was Michelangelo Antonioni's film Blow Up. And some of the others were Soldier Story, Death Wish, and I received an Academy Award for Round Midnight. Both Igor Stravinsky and Ludwig van Beethoven exemplify the creative spirit. In a previous lecture, I discussed Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, a concert work for orchestra and ballet that debuted in Paris in 1913. At the premiere, the groundbreaking avant-garde music and Vaslav Nijinsky's choreography incited a riot. Similarly, over 100 years earlier, in 1805, Beethoven publicly premiered his Third Symphony in E-flat major, the Eroica. And although it didn't cause a furor, it was unconventional in its ideas, presentation, emotional depth, and turned tradition upside down. Both of these works broke musical rules. They courageously and passionately expressed complex emotions, altered the idea of what music could communicate, transformed the course of what followed, and remain two of the most studied, influential masterpieces in music history. I strongly suggest you check out the brilliant Michael Tilson Thomas Informances episodes of the PBS program Keeping Score that bring life and meaning to the Rite of Spring and the Third Symphony. I had my own brush with an unreceptive audience. In 1973, when I took my Headhunters band to perform at the Berlin Jazz Festival. Although the first of these new recordings, Headhunters, hadn't arrived in Europe, by this time we were tight with our approach and were receiving widespread acceptance and accolades back in the United States. Soon after the beginning of this concert in Germany, people began booing and whistling loudly, and we were deluged by water bags, tomatoes, and fruit that were thrown at us on the stage. And our music was hot. A year later, we were back in the same venue, but this time, the audience was dancing in the aisles. Hearing on their radios about the widespread acceptance and love for the music in the United States, they changed their perspective and listened to the band with a fresh viewpoint. Inspired by our musical ancestors, we had the courage of our convictions to explore uncharted territory. Let's look at this list of characteristics of creativity again. Inspiration, hard work, challenge, never give up spirit, courage, originality, and innovation, ability or skill, imagination. Could these characteristics apply to your life too? Artists in the cultural fields aren't the only people to possess these keys. Each of you is a key holder too. This afternoon, I've tried to combine Buddhism and creativity together from my own experiences. I truly believe that my life as a musician and a human being has been profoundly transformed by the impact of Buddhism on my music and my life. Among the many lessons I've learned from my life mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, is the concept of living a creative life, and this applies to everyone. It's a life that we're all capable of creating by utilizing many of these same characteristics that are inherent in human life. A broader perspective of these characteristics reveals that there's no essential difference between artists of culture and everyone else. A person who can live with imagination, hard work, innovation, along with integrity, wisdom, and compassion, in spite of their difficult circumstances, can be a profound contributor toward the creation of a harmonious human orchestra of life, therefore emerging like a beautiful lotus blossoming in the muddy swamp. And I hope all of us can agree that we are all artists playing the music, writing the script, or painting the picture of our lives. Concerning the mastery of an art form, I believe that the art of living is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the most difficult to master. Thank you for joining me. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you. I hope that I'll see you next week for my final lecture called Once Upon a Time, where I'll unlock, reveal, and demonstrate the art of performance. Thank you very much.